Welcome to the second episode of the third series of the Women in CX podcast, a series dedicated to real talk conversations between women in customer experience. Listen in as we share our career stories, relive the moments that shaped us, and voice our opinions as loudly as we like about all manner of CX subjects. I'll be your host, Clare Muscutt, and in today's episode, I'll be talking to a woman who was awarded an MBE for her services to fashion. Let me introduce you to today's inspiring guest. She began her career in publishing as a sub-editor at The Times, before founding her own affordable luxury e-commerce site, My Wardrobe, which was later acquired by Net-a-Porter. She went on to hold retail leadership roles, including luxury director at Shop Direct, and is a non-exec director at Next, but has since moved into retail technology as the managing director of TruFit EMEA. Please welcome to the show, CX sister Sarah Curran-Usher. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super excited.
No, you're more than welcome. And we're so excited to have you on the third series of the Women in CX podcast. And a big welcome to everybody listening at home as well. So this series is very much focusing on women in the business world and hearing their stories about how they got where they are and their advice for women in CX too. So my first question is going to be, with your dazzling career, how exactly have you arrived where you are? If you'd like to tell the listeners a little bit about your amazing history, I'm sure they'd love to learn more.
Thank you. You know, I think it's fair to say that there was never a formed, solid plan. But one thing that I've always, I guess, focused on, which has probably kept me on this sort of similar path, is an absolute passion to, first of all, love what you do across any role. But also, I've constantly been I'm always super interested in why people do what they do. And so that even more so in the the scope of retail and in the scope of digital. I think it's even more important, but even more exciting for the business as well.
Yeah. So give us a little tour through your history then. So tell us about being an entrepreneur first.
So, yeah, I don't think I formally sort of set about to be an entrepreneur. I think that's fair to say. I spent my 20s having various roles, while, within L'Oreal, Laboratoire Garnier, within advertising, within fashion, within News International, where then I sort of moved on and became a sub-editor at the Times. And that gave me an insight into digital publishing and consistency of style and all these things. And then I left, and at the age of 30, I opened a fashion store. So that's when I really became my own boss, I guess. And then it was just something that I finally found what I loved and what actually I was good at, and why I think I was good at it and why I remain good at it is that I'm constantly thinking about the customer through her eyes and their eyes. And that's as much was as relevant to the in-store experience and how could I keep driving her to come to the store or come back to the store and all these things, right through to the digital experience of engagement and, the life before, I guess, hyper or one-to-one personalization, but all that sort of important insight into customer behavior. So that's when I just really found my zone. I found what I was really good at and loved. And that's what sort of drew me to stay within being an entrepreneur, as it were. And then I've been, I guess, some might call it, an entrepreneur in residence when I joined Shop Direct in 2013 and launched their premium platform. And it was very much a startup in concept and in sort of and in approach. But I guess, I called us a trust fund startup because, I had access to things which in my previous startup, I certainly didn't have. And now I'm at TruFit. That's an American tech business, which, we still consider ourselves a startup. And the EU is also kind of is probably more of a startup within the TruFit sort of story than North America.
Wow, okay. So if I remember rightly, you sold your business to Net-a-Porter originally?
So the business actually, so I left in 20, when did I leave? 2011.
Mhm.
And then for various reasons, I think, the reason why I did leave actually was I felt that the proposition was going over the was going to lose its core customer, because the
Mm,
core customer was very much about that middle shopper between Net and ASOS.
mm,
Probably, we used to refer to it as accessible luxury.
mm,
But they decided to take a much higher price point. And I remember saying, you have no buying budget. You've therefore got to focus on driving this new customer that we don't have.
right.
You're going to lose engagement. You're going to lose kind of sales. And, they felt that my view was wrong, theirs was right. And so I decided to leave. And then unfortunately, they started to really go into a bit of a tailspin.
Mm,
So it was then sort of sold to another purchaser, and
mm,
latterly sort of sold on to Net. But yeah, I still remained super proud of what we did. We were the third e-com fashion multi-brand retailer behind Net and ASOS. Everything we did, we learnt through trial and error.
mm,
There were no playbooks
mm,
to how to launch an e-tail business. And it was something that I just became addicted to. In terms of, for me, the focus is, how can I make the customer feel delighted? How can I make they feel special about their purchase?
mm,
And that's not just therefore about the experience when they receive the item, and how you make them feel good.
mm,
There's only a certain amount of ribbons and packaging that
mhm,
will do that. You've also got to make sure that you hit the spot on other parts of the customer journey, even more so now, because it's a super competitive space. But then the customer is even more sort of expecting of
mm,
this sort of experience, because you have platforms such as Amazon, which are so easy to navigate, and the sort of real sort of personalized experience.
mm.
But also now everything is on a digital platform, from the TV you watch to the music you listen to. So they are even more advanced than they ever were. So understanding customer experience, and user experience and user journey is more important than ever.
There must have been some moments that really shaped you along the way to becoming a senior executive.
So, bit of background. I got asked to leave school after my GCSEs, which is essentially public school taught for expelled, because I was disruptive, and I didn't understand sort of these rules that just didn't make any sense anymore. And I think that was very much a sign of my disruptive nature, because it's things like that helped sort of evolve to what it is
Mm,
today.
yeah, yeah.
I've always sort of had that view of looking at what's working within the non sort of the non-fashion space. That example of my TV, for instance, originally came from when I was sort of at home, and I realized sort of that the cupboards were bare. And so I went on to Ocado, which was then just the sole sort of
Yeah.
platform for Waitrose. And
Mm,
they had this thing, which was, the recipes and how to cook something. And at the end of the recipes, you could click to buy all the ingredients. And then I
mm,
thought, oh my gosh, well, wouldn't that be the same for
clothes.
a woman's
Yeah.
sort of staple wardrobe
Yeah.
and seasonal wardrobe? And so it was these things that I love to look at, areas which are also customer related in their touch point, but they do things differently. And it kind of is really quite a freeing up experience. So it was these sorts of things that then I think led to the MBE, which was, services to the fashion industry globally. And that was something that was, it was kind of, it finished what was essentially a bit of a heartbreaking story with the brand that I'd launched and had become a little bit sort of a toxic environment for me. To be recognized for that was probably the sort of booster that I needed to get up and do exclusive. To do very exclusive with Shop Direct.
Oh, it's nice to hear that it was a painful time, but it had a sweet ending and it led you to a new beginning. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think there are, particularly when you're in a fast-paced industry, with that's super competitive. There are that's in itself very much after instant gratification. It was rewarding to get something that was sort of 18 months after the event. It made me realize, okay, so good things can come out further down the line. It doesn't mean the end. So it was a great learning experience, if I'm honest.
But it's really awesome to hear you talking about the customer as she, and as a senior woman leading business. I'm sure in the big senior roles that you've taken on at different companies, you would have taken that with you. Did you ever find it difficult, like influencing the rest of the C-suite with your perspective? Because I know from my own experience working in big retail, the customer, the way you spoke about her, isn't necessarily on the agenda the same way.
So I think when I first started, particularly at Shop Direct, I had to take them on a journey. It was very much decided by ROI and what they considered important. And as a retailer, their view of what was important was not aligned to knowing their customer and what their customer felt was important. So there was an adjustment, but then interestingly enough, they kind of used exclusive as a bit of an opportunity to trial out different, uh, you know, positions and different approaches to the on-site experience, to editorial or moving content or inspiration, through to a more elevated package than what they already had. And actually, what I was trying to get them to understand is that it's not about the immediate revenue driver that you need to look at. It's got to be the long tail. It's got to be the halo effect. That when you drive loyalty, you have to think outside of the hard ROI. You have to take a more of a blended 360 approach to analyzing and understanding the value that's being driven, versus your own perceived view of what is right for the business versus what is right for the customer. And it took a while, but then they definitely, they then embedded and onboarded a lot of the processes and things that I'd started. And it's part of their internal sort of customer sort of centric approach now. So, but yeah, I love a challenge. I always say, if it was that easy, it would have been already done. And if it's not challenging, it's not rewarding in the long run. So, I take the view that just because that's the way they've always done it, it doesn't mean that that's the right way, or it doesn't mean that that's the right thing for today and tomorrow.
And interesting that you say for today and tomorrow, because you've seen retail, especially fashion and luxury retail, go from stores to becoming online in the last 12 months. Obviously, we haven't had much choice
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
physical and digital. I'm really interested to understand a little bit more about what TruFit is, and to kind of loop back to that, knowing your customer better than anyone. With personalization now in online, surely that must have become one of the most important things to do with data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the challenge has been for the sector, that it, dependent on where the retail brand or platform was on their digital transformation, they were either sort of kind of already engaged and ahead enough on that, on that path, or they were very much cut short.
Mm.
And so what we saw was a real adjustment in, from I would say March through to June, July, and the brands and retailers who were sufficiently sort of already along that sort of digital path, digital transformational path,
Mm.
were able to adjust once they had sort of realigned their stock position, cancelled out of orders, and sort of made sure that the proposition was more in line with what the customer wanted versus what had been planned, i.e., lots of
Mm.
occasions, etc.
Mm.
And it was the customers who were not sufficiently progressed and were probably too heavily weighted on their high street footprint that really sort of took until, I would say, Q4 to be in a position to move forward with great sort of great momentum. So we saw some real sort of I guess some winners and losers, even though I hate that term.
So your experience has been amazing because you saw that transition from stores being predominantly physical to growing one of the first e-tail businesses, moving through your career as retail changed to become more balanced in terms of its online presence. And rightly, as you pointed out, the expectation of customers about ease of use and usability and ease of dealing with retailers online has been shaped by Amazon. Could you tell us a bit more about TruFit and what you do and how that's helping to drive better customer experience in that space?
Yeah, so TruFit launched in 2005, and we started off as, the name would dictate, a sort of a size and fit solution. And we've grown to have the world's largest connected data set for fashion. And it's all held within our fashion genome, which I call the brains of the platform,
Mm-hmm.
which analyzes over 17,000 retail brands, including the likes of sort of Boden and Ralph Lauren, M&S more recently, and also 180 million TruFit members who are registered on the platform globally. So this means that we can offer up insights to improve customer experience based on how a customer shops with that retailer, and also other brands they buy from based on insights on style, fit, size, preferences, and sort of affordability. So that means that, more than just what we were, which was that sort of vertical of a size and fit solution, it means that we can support our retail partners and brands across the whole customer experience online, and ultimately drive up key metrics such as conversion or average order value or average order frequency, lifetime value. So, and then it's then just removing the inefficiencies. And these inefficiencies are, for instance, what we call sequence sampling. So
Yeah.
when a customer, for instance, buys a size because, but there's no guidance as to the size that she actually is. So she makes an assumption, it's the wrong size, she returns it and purchases another size. And then there's sample sizing, where she'll buy multiple sizes of the same style. And that you're going to get at least one, or, one, two, or all of that order back. Now, removal of that inefficiency is ultimately there to help protect your sort of the operational margin, because sometimes there's been I think a slowness to truly understand the actual cost of an e-com platform and an e-com player. So tidying up, and particularly if you're a brand with lower average selling prices or lower sort of average order value, it's so important to focus on that sort of protecting of margin. So we've really kind of, I guess, broadened out from just being size and fit to now being a true sort of personalization platform.
That's so cool. And I have to say, I am one of those women who sometimes, or quite often, from online retailers, the ones that fit into that bracket of lower price point and should be protecting their margin, I have to order a 10, a 12, and a 14 because I just never know what size it's going to be, because there's such a variation. And
Yeah.
even like in, let's say, jeans categories in some online retailers, you get a size 10 and they arrive and literally they're about that big.
I know. And as an industry, we know that this has been a problem
Mm,
across the board. And, even in terms of one particular brand, you can also have inconsistencies of size and fit dependent on where the garment's produced. And it's just, and unfortunately, I think maybe actually fortunately rather, now that there is this also importance on the D2C, the direct to consumer channels for these
mm,
brands, um, they are understanding the impact that it has had on retailers
mm,
themselves for a long time.
mm.
So there is a sort of a slow move to help sort of remove these issues, but it is unfortunately it's one of the areas that brings the most frustration for a customer.
Mm. Yeah, no, it does. And I suppose in some ways, sometimes I'll get a size 10 that's clearly actually a size 12, and I'll be like, oh,
I
this
know.
feels nice. But then it happens the other way and I get very
I know.
disappointed.
Oh my God. It can wreck your day. I've been there. That if that in the sort of the in the world of sort of digital, but then a poorly lit
Oh,
changing
changing
room
room.
in an actual physical store is equally enough to take the thrill out of shopping.
Yeah, and there's so many of them. I've never really understood why that isn't an area that gets more investment. Because if you
I
can
know.
feel gorgeous and glamorous, like we have our ring lights and stuff these days, don't we? Now we spend so much time online.
Totally.
I think we should have
Totally.
some kind of equivalent ring lighting system.
But I think it's
Clothing
also
changing room.
mindset. So when I had the physical store,
Mm,
I understood as a customer how the experience in the changing room from a lighting and a mirrors
mm.
perspective can impact whether or not you purchase ultimately that item.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I always made a big focus on investing in that area because that's where you want your customer to feel the most comfortable
Mm,
and the most secure. But a lot of the time, when you look at wider, larger, sort of high street brands,
mm,
that's not an area that the FD wants to invest in because they don't necessarily see what the return on investment is, and
mm.
they don't attribute it. And maybe because they've not experienced it themselves, they put very little importance on it.
Just thinking, like most of the FDs I've ever met have been white middle-aged men. I don't know if that
Yeah, yeah.
that perhaps,
Yeah.
perhaps is a
It's
little
continuing
correlation.
the theme. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but you've really clearly pointed out there the link between customer experience, buying more, coming back and buying more, feeling good when you buy something, especially in
Yeah,
clothing and of course in luxury retail, delivers the results. And you don't have to try quite so hard with
yeah,
advertising and promotion or suffer the consequences of so many returns if you do think about those things. So it's really awesome to hear you share those examples. But I know when we talked the first time, we discussed the principle that from, I guess, someone who's always worked in the CX side of business, how frustrating it has always been that that C-suite of executives undervalue and underrate customer experience. And I know that's something that you
mm,
shared, you recognize too. Do you
mm.
have a view on why that is? We've mentioned the Pale Stale Male FD example. Apologies to anyone out there
Yeah,
for that
yeah,
stereotype because it's not all that way. But
yeah.
any thoughts on why?
I think a lot of the industry has been so focused on driving, and rightly so, the focus of putting profit and shareholder value has been at the top of the agenda
Mm,
over the actual benefit and thought for the customer.
mm,
And so when you look at, that, and that goes as much in terms of if you look at the reason why we've been in a position of within the retail sector of being overstocked, and therefore this sort of perpetual constant discounting, sort of drug that has been hooked on,
Yeah.
is because every year there was always this drive for bigger sales.
Mm.
Driving bigger sales doesn't necessarily always equal driving stronger profits, and so there became this also disalignment. So everything that the FD would not feel added directly to that agenda and that goal would be removed.
Mm.
And so I think there's one of the reasons why we have seen the issue become even more apparent, is that it's a lot of the time these FDs and decision makers just simply don't think through the eyes of actually being a customer,
Mm.
or they don't put enough importance on it. So the reason why it's also so important to drive more women within sort of leadership on the customer experience side of retail, but also we need more female leadership at board level
Yep.
as well, because we have to get and it's changing.
Mm.
It's very much of a sort of a cultural issue that we've had. But getting brands and retailers to understand that actually, it's not necessarily always about driving strong acquisition. It's about retention is hugely important. That's never really been fully understood, because how can you measure that? Well, it's actually easy to measure sort of retention through lifetime value than it is necessarily to understand the right sort of split in terms of how much you should pay for a customer. But it is changing, but it's been one of the reasons why the industry is in such a mess in
Mm.
my sort of perspective as a observer.
So yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that, because I think there's definitely a link between the empathy we have as women to be able to
Mm.
put ourselves more easily into the shoes of the customer or the employee, but absolutely we have to balance that with the commercial rigor that we're discussing
Yeah,
today, and about establishing and finding those win-wins that you
yeah.
can achieve both. And it's great to see how TruFit is doing that.
Mm.
um in terms of how customer experience has been perhaps pitched to you in the past as part of those board conversations, what do you see the common mistakes being made by more junior managers attempting to influence the C-suite executive?
I think so. When you sort of talk about customer experience, particularly within a sort of a young eager beaver, let's say, sometimes there's been this real haste to bring in these really kind of gimmicky innovations, which ultimately I think don't enhance the experience. So I remember there was a phase of the there was this phase of everyone talking about 3D shopping was going to be the
Yeah.
next way.
Mm.
Realistically, who on earth was going to, sit in front of a camera with, or sit in front of a laptop or desktop with some sort of needed spectacles that you'd have to wear? So there's some of it was just not really thought through, i.e., what would be that? Is that really an enhanced experience? No, actually, because there's so many things that can go wrong. Um, and so,
And
and
very
because
expensive as well, tech wise.
yeah, and I think, people want to be seen as, tech, it's got to be innovative and leading
Sexy.
edges and sexy. And that's not necessarily the case, actually, which is why thinking as a customer and thinking about what the end goal is, i.e., more customers to complete at basket, and more frequency of orders and higher orders, all these sorts of things. Those are the important things. So how can we enhance? How can we remove the obstacles? So rather than removing obstacles, it was almost like they were adding more obstacles into the experience and distracting from the ultimate goal. Now I think we're getting to a really good place from a customer experience perspective, and so I feel super positive and super excited about that. And TruFit is very much a kind of a trusted partner for a lot of global brands now, particularly when it comes to on-site personalization and not simply just size and fit, but other things as well.
Mm. Yeah, there's a couple of things really resonated with me on that last example. So I think it's that principle that you can't cut your way to growth, but the discounting reliance that, especially in the big box retailers that sell things at a very low price, they've put themselves in that corner, and it kind of perpetuates, doesn't it?
Totally.
But the interesting thing for me is like this balance between growth and loyalty, and it's a debate that happens constantly in the customer experience world, where like kind of loyalty and advocacy are two key metrics that the unenlightened are really focused on. But I think what you said there was actually about how do you remove barriers to purchase and remove the obstacles out of the way that is absolutely a path to growth. So I think whilst loyalty and retention is important, when thinking about customer experience and the customer journey, for me, there isn't enough focus on removing those barriers. And also, you know, as you said, taking going to say a customer or a user, or however you want to describe it, whatever industry you come from, you know, being able to onboard them and enable them to become a higher spending or higher value customer, because you're actually providing them value back with your service, your experience, and the additional benefits that they might not get elsewhere.
And I think it's really important that I stress that, you know, particularly when we're talking about profitability, and sometimes I think there's this unfair assumption towards female leadership that we're focused on all the sort of exciting and cozy stuff, the warm stuff that kind of creates this loyalty, but actually that therefore we're not looking at the bottom line. And that's not the case, because actually, particularly if you've got a low average selling point, protecting your operational margin and operational profits is even more important, because you haven't got much to play with. But then it's about driving that repeat customer through strong loyalty, strong retention. It's about maybe purchasing less inventory and stock so that you're actually selling more at a percentage of full price, actually full price, versus having to constantly give out discounts to incentivize people to shop. So it's about being more efficient. And so I think what COVID has allowed the industry to do is, it was a bit of a wake-up call, particularly when we were in April and May, and we could see that we were looking through the eyes of this sort of inventory mountain globally. That the habits and the production from a seasonality perspective were not in line with customer and the customer's buy now, wear now needs, and, you know, aspirations. And so it was a real opportunity to press pause and do what we've always wanted to do, which is tidy up our act, and stop buying at these crazy sort of inflated volumes, because we're looking to grow another 20%. But then, you know, you can't, at some point there comes a saturation. So I think that as terrible as COVID has been, I think it has been and I'm always one to try and focus on where the positives are. I think there are huge positives, as if we take this opportunity to tidy up our our backyard, as it were.
Stock room.
And you know, from an environmental perspective as well. So there are, you know, loads of key strategies that that I feel now are, you know, are real opportunities.
And fast fashion is definitely problematic when it comes to sustainability for the environment. So just to close off then, thank you so much for your time. If we were going to leave women in CX with any kind of top pieces of advice to be able to influence senior leaders like you, what would you get them to be focusing on?
About sort of really understanding, okay, what is this solution that I'm going to propose there to help remove? And sometimes we have to appreciate that we have to get people on a journey with us. So you also have to do the graft yourself, to talk to key stakeholders. You know, sometimes it's not, the world isn't always backing us. So we need to never be discouraged. So just because one person, in the leadership team that you want to sort of bring on the journey says, no, it's a terrible idea. It doesn't mean it's a terrible idea. It just means they don't probably have the vision. And so you sort of take the feedback and tweak it and improve. It's constant enhancements, constant improvements. So never let someone's no be a reason why you don't think it's a valid excuse, because that's just not the right thing to do. And if there are countless examples of amazing people. Even Zuckerberg, had a number of failures in terms of wanting to get his project off in the early days. So, but sometimes we need to take it upon ourselves to think, okay, well, how can I convey the spirit of what it is this is looking to solve better, or understand what the business priority is and sort of work backwards. So sometimes life is never going to be this sort of shedding of waters moment and just an easy path. Sometimes, if we look back, there are reasons why we need to go back and sort of think through the proposition and the experience and tweak it and refine it. But take the lesson, apply it, and get better. So that's my thing, because I think sometimes in life we can be so discouraged if we get a no, and we sort of take it upon us and we see it as a failure. And there is no such thing as failure unless you just let that stop your sort of ultimate goal and ambition. To evolve, we need to completely sort of refine. It's the same with any sort of tech product, same with any customer experience. You take the data and you enhance it and you make adjustments. So that's just a kind of a really sort of basic one from a sort of keep going perspective.
So basic, but very inspirational. I got the little feeling of goosebumps for me as well.
Darling, it's from me to you.
No, actually, I'm going through something similar myself at the moment, like in my own startup journey, building this community, and like just remembering that, we're not going to get this right first time, but as long as we stay open and keep learning. I had a tough day today, and like not letting that be the thing that stops you from carrying on, and totally. And it is all about learning. You're right, in business, in startups, in customer experience, in digital and technology, we also just need to think about that for our self-development as well sometimes.
But also, it goes back to that instant gratification. So we're so used to needing instant kind of recognition, or it just does not work that way. You need to allow that, you might have an amazing idea, but from amazing idea to launch product might not just be sort of an overnight success. But there will be a reason why that is. And it's important that, you tweak and you adjust your pitch, or be it your business plan, or be it your, the new sort of browsing experience, enhanced experience, whatever it might be. So it's never, from sort of launching or sort of idea to launch or success is never a sort of a quick short line. It's always like,
but who knows, 18 months later you might get an MBE.
Who knows, darling? Hearing you from the sidelines.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Women in CX podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've absolutely loved it. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to everybody who listened along at home as well. We'll see you all next week. Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Women in CX podcast with me, Clare Muscutt. If you enjoyed the show, please drop us a like, subscribe, and leave a review on whichever platform you're listening or watching on. And if you want to know more, please join us at womenincx.community and follow the Women in CX page on LinkedIn. Join us again next week, where in celebration of Pride, we'll be featuring a throwback to when I got to hang out with Medallia's Senior Director of Professional Services, Amanda Riches. See you all next week.